Alrighty, I'm going to share my screen again and we will kick off part two here. Everyone see that okay? You're muted, so I can't tell. I assume that's a yes.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so part two here, we're going to talk about best practices in mission planning. I'm going to talk a bit about how collaboration works and how to write effective plans. This is by no means a search management class. We spend probably better part of an entire day on how to conceptualize and write good plans. So this is going to be very brief and more mechanical, I would say. Drawing clean and smart search areas. I'm going to do a big example on bulk operations and how to lever bulk operations to make an efficient search plan. Then I'm going to talk about our workflow on our, do you guys use 104 plans that we from the old 104 forms for assignments, or what do you guys use up there?
So it depends on the agency. Can you hear me? Or me?
Yeah,
Okay, so it depends on the agency, but yes, we use or the 204 like for a division rather
right.
than 104 for a team per se. But
Okay. Yeah, so I'll go through kind of how that's evolved on our end down here. And Matt and I just kind of a month ago made another major change to the workflow, which made it pretty much paperless. So I'm going to spend some time on that. And then how we label and track resources so that we don't goof things up or lose people in the field. So with that, I'm going to kick this off. The first thing I do, and I've kind of mentioned this first time around, is selecting those best map layers and saving them as a default. It almost never gets done, and it makes such a big difference. I make sure I have my main objects, the last known place, the PLS, and start doing my folders. And how do we write assignments in a good way? So oftentimes this is done remotely, and there's a whole process that we go through in the planning P and all. But when you talk about the mechanics of writing assignments, someone needs to be in charge, the plan section chief, ideally, and they will split up the plans writing. So there's different ways to do it. Sometimes it'll be by a planning region. So we have like six different regions on our map, and you do region one, I'll do region two, you do region three. Or you can do it by resource type, because a lot of times we'll draw assignments that are a little bit different style. Like an e-bike assignment is going to look a lot different than a ground assignment or something like that, or you know, OHV or whatever. So you can do it that way, or you can do it by type. Like I'll do all the hasty trail searches, you do the area searches, other linear features like drainages and creeks. But anyway, the key is not to have people stepping on each other's toes. So the plan section chief's job is to figure out how to kind of divvy that work up. And kind of our best practice is get those basic assignments and segments drawn in Caltopo first. Don't worry about the details like names and descriptions and all that. We're really getting those shapes. Hopefully, we're thinking about them, in a good way, and we're approaching it with good segments on. But we can fill in those details later, especially assignment labeling and stuff like that. I'll generally include the basic resource type right away, whether it's a ground or canine or e-bike or whatever. Um, One of the things I spend a lot of time on is defining type one assignments versus type two assignments and all, and making sure I don't get people who are unqualified into a really bad, alpine situation or something like that. So once we've kind of roughed out our assignments, we'll complete the detailed descriptions in Caltopo, set our team sizes, the resource type, or ground type one and so forth. Prioritize the importance, high, medium, low priority assignments. Note that that only shows up on the desktop version, the web interface. The mobile app doesn't say, "Oh, Rich, you just got assigned a low priority assignment." So that's intentionally left out of the mobile app. So, you don't go out there with a poor attitude because you got a low priority assignment, let's say. And then I spent a lot of time thinking about the transportation and deployment plan. Are we going to self-deploy people? Are we having helicopters today? And we spend probably 2 hours on helicopters and how you lay out LZs and how you think about the time required to disperse people on helicopters and such. So that's a big project too, and that should go into the formation of your plan here. Then finally, we do the assignment labels using bulk operations typically, and we also use bulk operations to fill out all the other information that's common, such as radio channels, POD, time for a search segment and that sort of thing. And that's kind of done at the end. And one of the reasons is if everybody starts putting their own labels in, AAA, BAC, it's very easy, even with rules, to end up with two AKs or two ALs. And then all of a sudden you're sending teams out and you're like, oh my God, I've got two ALs out there. How do I fix this problem? So by labeling them at the end, it makes it just a lot cleaner. Segment design is a big deal. This is a recent search we had, and I was kind of proud because this was operational period 11 because the team numbers all begin with 11, and we're actually on operational period 14 of this search now. It's a local search for us. But what I liked about this little example is we had some of our youth members and some of our less experienced members draw these search segments up, and they did a really good job of using Snap 2 and such. And you can see I have, for the most part, really clean borders on the assignments and all. It looks pretty clean. There's maybe a little tiny miss here or there, but that's a great example of drawing segments that follow contours like roads and such, and then they snap together between bordering assignments so you don't have confusing overlap and so forth. So, how do you kind of go about thoughtful segment design? And I think the number one rule is to always attempt to use geographic handrails. It's so easy to just draw shapes on a map and send a team out, and then you realize they're going up and down and up and down and up and down instead of following along a nice contour back and forth and so forth. So, spending a little time up front thinking about how you draw your assignments up can make a really big difference and become like a force multiplier out in the field because you've given those guys every chance to succeed out in the field. So in this case, I've got an example. I kind of use italics on the right here where I've used trails. Actually, let me blow this up just a little bit for myself. Can you guys see that okay in terms of
Yeah.
size and stuff? Yes, I guess. Yep. Okay, cool. All right. So in this case, it's a pretty simple assignment to draw because I have a trail system here, and 95% of it can be defined by the border of a trail. So, if someone has the adjacent side of the trail, it's going to be a clean and well-defined, border. I'm not going to get lost. I can figure out how to tack it. I can go along contours back and forth like this, and then work my way down into the flat area. So that's a well thought out assignment, and I'm not just giving someone a random box up on a hillside. Here's another one where I've used drainages and trail systems. Like I got this big dark drainage on the west side. I've got a trail system that goes around the north and the east side. And then at the bottom, I kind of had to use a subtle little drainage there to kind of finish things off. But those are all kind of geographic, borders that make sense when you're in the field. And if I'm leading a team out in the field, I can pretty easily figure out how to, most efficiently cover that area. And when I hit a border, I kind of know I've hit it, even though I still have Caltopo or whatever. But I can certainly tell when I've hit the bottom of the drainage or the trail that borders the east side and such. And just a couple more examples. Here's a kind of a marshy area where I've got trails and creeks and some contour lines to kind of make a clean border of an area segment. Another one with drainages and trails and contour lines here. So if I were writing a description, I could say, search the slope between 18E05 road and the 7,200-foot contour line working southeast to the seasonal creek drainage. So I can kind of look at that and say like, oh, I know what they want me to do and I know what my borders are and they make sense. So I think, you can't always do this, but geographical borders are a really good starting point to good search assignments. Another big mistake is to use geographical borders and such, which I did here, but not think through the problem entirely. This is from a real search with real assignments from a few years ago. And that's a really gnarly canyon down there with a big ripping river at the bottom. And we found a Jeep at the top where the LKP is, and the guy was missing right at the top of a cliffy area, basically. And So we don't really know exactly what happened. And then assignments get drawn to kind of search essentially a pretty steep area below his car. Some if you don't think that through real carefully, that's going to be a disaster the next day because the team's going to go out and they're going to look at this and they're like, I can't search this. I need like 10 rope systems to get down the side of this cliff. But assignments get drawn in the mountains like that all the time because either it's a lack of experience or it's 11 o'clock at night and you're trying to bang out 40 assignments. But if you just take a little more time and use that S button for slope angle shading, you will start to see all the problems that you're potentially creating by drawing these assignments. And in this case, the segment on the left has lots of blue and black, which is 40 to 100% slope. So that's basically cliffs. And you could never search that without ropes. And the one on the right, you might kill somebody. You might have a chance of searching it, but you're probably going to injure somebody too. And searching with ropes, as you probably all know, is super inefficient unless you have a very targeted area. So, how do I make this assignment better? If I think about what would be more realistic, I would hammer the top of the cliff and the plateau, and I'd make sure nobody got near the edge and fell off. And I would send people to the bottom side of the cliff area too. And I would skip the middle altogether in terms of ground assignments. And I would do something that looks like this in 3D. I'm kind of covering the top really well. I'm covering the bottom really well. And I would say search for signs of slippage, etc., from above. Search the scree field below and the cliff faces with binoculars and such. Keep searchers off the steep slopes. And then I'd probably have, if I had a helicopter resource, I'd do a low and slow right back and forth across the cliff faces there to see if there's any sign of the missing person there. And this is, I don't know about in Oregon, but this is a very typical search profile for us now in the Sierra in particular, or Mendocino, the coastal ranges. There are a lot of places where you just can't search, but there are also places where there's a high likelihood of a traumatic injury, and you've got to kind of figure out the best way to approach that. And it's usually not just drawing segments on cliffs. You have to kind of think the problem through, and then you have to think about what resources you need to accomplish that particular goal. Another thing I've touched on briefly, 3D is great. When I should change these slides to have some updated ones with assignments on them. But once you have all your assignments drawn and you just spin around the mountain and you look at the drainages and all, it's a very powerful way to visualize. And here's slope angle shading with the same thing. And then as I mentioned earlier, using the Sentinel weekly to kind of visualize snow and ice levels and things is pretty useful. So, and then blending it together with another contour map, that can all be good stuff. And I think of one search in particular, which we missed the person and he was found around 20 odd days later. We did a very long search and it wasn't until we really went to the 3D maps. We had poor maps that did not show a particular route that would have been an obvious mistake that he could have made and gone out that way. It's second guessing, but that's where we found this guy. And as soon as we went through this exercise in 3D, you could exactly visualize why that missing person might have gone that way. I don't know if it would have changed our search exactly, but it was certainly eye-opening to me to always use 3D and kind of look around a little bit. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about assignments in populated areas. It's something we run into a lot. I'm sure you have some dementia searches up there and things. That's our most common, sometimes missing children and things, or developmentally disabled people who get lost or take off. So, what people struggle with drawing these kinds of assignments. And my number one rule of thumb is to turn on the parcel data and then draw the borders based on backyard fences essentially. Use the property lines to delineate your search area. Because sometimes you'll try to, you'll draw, oh, you search this side of the street, I'll search the other side of the street, and then you have two teams on the same street. That doesn't make any sense. One team should cover one street, and up to whether or not you actually search people's yards or knock on their doors, draw the segments such that they cover an entire set of property lines. And the same goes for fire evacuations. If you're doing door to doors, I think the same approach works really, really well. One team covers both sides of the street. What is the objective on that search? Are we searching just front yards? Are we driving down the road with sirens for an evacuation? Are we contacting owners? Are we searching the vehicles and such? Are we asking the owners to search their house? So each one of those approaches takes a different amount of time, and therefore the amount of houses, say, a search crew can cover varies a lot. So I usually try to measure that out. And one of the things, I'll give you another example, when we had the campfire that burned down Paradise and Magalia a few years ago, and it's the deadliest fire in California history. When we were trying to do, we were learning this on the fly. How do we search all of the houses? How long does it take? And we put National Geographic, um, the National Guard nano trackers on each team, and we started monitoring them. How long did they spend at each house to kind of search the footprint of the house and stuff? And after like a few hours, we had enough data to tell, oh, they can do like 4 houses per hour. So that let us put together better plans for the next day about how many people we need on each task force to go into each neighborhood and so forth. So thinking about, not just the assignments, but how many people do I need to do them or how big should I make them? It kind of comes with that. And you can kind of think the problem through, but it's so easy just to draw shapes on a map and not think through all those little issues. So I always encourage people to think about that approach. Another one that gets quite messy, especially in like park areas and such, is like the spaghetti web of trails. And I see people often trying to draw, hasty assignments on those trails and things like that. And that can get really messy and confusing because it's hard to draw on each one, and then different people going to different trails have to cross over the same interconnecting trails. So what I kind of like to do is sort of isolate the way in and the way out of a trail system. So in this case, in the upper left corner, there's a way into the system. Upper right, there's a way out. Lower right, there's a way out. And then the, bottom area, there's one way out kind of. So I would draw sort of a natural box around that segment and say, hasty search 30 feet either side of the trail within the trail network of segment AA, you know, and that makes it clean and simple, right? And I can probably draw a nice snap to connecting area search right next to that one. And you don't see this style a lot, but like in our county, it works really well in a lot of places where we have exactly this situation. Lots of interconnecting trails, basically. In fact, much of Northern California has that near populated areas. In remote areas, trails get a little more sparse, so you can draw them differently. But in a park system in a county, like this is a good way to draw those assignments, I think. Water is another thing that kind of is a whole couple of days of classwork, but I think people often clutter up maps when they're drawing water assignments. And one of the things you can do is kind of look at the body of water and what you're trying to do and kind of make it simple. In this case, I just drew a little rectangle called segment WA and said carefully search the shoreline in and around the docks throughout the entire lagoon for clues or signs of the missing person. And so, someone went missing potentially in there. That's an easy way to do it. And it's much cleaner than trying to draw a shape that follows the entire contour. And then if I put a dive team in, let's say, to search along 5 or 6 houses because they can't cover much territory, I could have another clean segment for that dive team and they're not overlapping and confusing. It keeps it nice and clean and simple. Down below, similarly, if I'm doing a long stretch of along a canal, let's say, carefully search marked shoreline and shallows for clues or signs of the MP. And I could probably do that one from a boat, or I could probably do it from shore as well. I might assign it twice, once to a water resource, once to a ground resource. So just thinking about keeping the map cluttered while uncluttered while, you know, maximizing a description kind of makes sense. And canines sort of do the same thing, right? I mean, trailing dog assignments, new planners that on our team always get stumped by like, how do I draw a trailing dog assignment? What do I do? I'm like, keep it as small as simple. Draw a little tiny box so it's registered in Caltopo. Put it near the house. Collect SIN articles and start trailing canine at the MP residence. That's pretty simple. Or if I have a trail, junction like the one down below, collect SIN articles, start the trailing canine at the trail junction to determine impede passage and direction of travel. Similarly, if I have roads that cross, say, drainages or streams, great places to put a trailing dog with a scent just to see if anything's coming up and down that channel. You can just draw a bunch of boxes along a roadway and keep it simple. And then that handler still has a pretty good idea of what you're trying to achieve there. So, small, clean, and simple, but don't lose any important detail, I guess would be the way to describe that. This one's kind of new, and we came up with this like, I don't know, a year ago maybe. We call it the hasty area search. And for lack of a better word, one of the things we teach is, if you have a four-person team in an alpine environment, we usually say 40 to 120 acres, depending on how open the terrain is or accessible, but never more than 120 acres a day for a four-person team in a tough environment. So in this case, I've got a giant area, 200 acres, and all I'm really interested in, let's say in this case, is survivability or hazards. Like if the person fell off it's a pretty benign area, but there are a couple cliffs in there, as marked by the red slope shading. So I'd say like check the bottom of the cliffs to see if there's any, injured party there. And then if we're on day 7 of the search, the only way this person's still alive is if they have water. So let's check all the little creeks and water access within that area. And don't waste your time grid searching the rest of the whole area. So it's kind of a hybrid assignment, um, but it can be effective because I'm looking for very specific things within a giant area instead of trying to tell somebody they have to spend 2 days searching that whole area. And we found this to be really effective in certain cases, especially when we're trying to maximize the chance of a live find and we're running out of time and we're expanding our search further out and we're focusing on areas that have water and drainages and mud holes or whatever where that person could still be alive potentially. So just another, tool in the toolbox, let's say. Another thing we like to talk about is writing complete assignments. And as I always like to say, the planner who wrote the plan is often not the briefer the next morning, right? So these things have to kind of stand on their own, and someone has to be able to communicate your planner's intent to the team lead the next day. And so in this case, this is not very informative. And this is kind of plan that gets written at midnight a lot of times. Search area CA on the map, right? No prior search. It's 8 acres. Here's our 104 form that came straight out of Caltopo. And the little asterisk next to the 4 up here means that it's a 4-person team. But other than that, I don't really know anything. So if I'm the briefer in the morning and I got told to go brief a team, that's about all I could tell them. However, if I knew the whole story, I'd be in a lot better shape here. It's an easy flat ground assignment, ground type 3, so that's good. I don't have to waste a higher trained team on a type 3 assignment. Grid search area CA bordered by Sir Francis Drake on the south, enclosed by barbed wire fences on the other 3 sides. Spacing is critical. Search for anything that looks out of place. Clues may be as small as keys. You have permission to search all the outbuildings. A deputy hasty searched it in the dark last night. Self-transport over there. I want super high POD for clues because that's where the guy lived and he disappeared. So that's a much better story. And if I at least wrote that down in Caltopo, I'm going to have a much better chance of giving that team a good briefing and setting them up for success out there. So putting, your planning intent into the descriptions carefully is really worth it. And once again, I know it's often done when people are tired and it's late and stuff, but that extra 5 minutes can be a huge multiplier in terms of efficiency out in the field the next day. So I really like to emphasize that. Team sizing and typing, something else we normally spend a ton of time on, but do you guys use the same system like type 1, type 2, type 3 ground?
Uh, not as much in a, not as formally as you do, as far as costing.
Yeah, so we're pretty much sticklers, and like on our team, everyone trains to like a type 2 level, which is pretty arduous. But the type one is our MRA, mountain research level team. And we go through a 10-hour fitness test once a year to re-up for that and stuff. So we're really like aggressive about making sure when we send a team out that's called a type one team from our county that they're not going to get themselves in trouble because we overstated their capabilities. And, every county has a different way of looking at that. In California, some have like super rigorous tests, kind of like we do, and others like, yeah, I'm a type one. And that's how we used to do it. And then we found out a lot of people that said they were type ones really weren't. So I've run a number of searches where we got into that situation and we sent a type one team, according to the county, into a type one environment. And that was a really not a good outcome. We either stranded people or put them in a place where we had an incident within the incident and had to kind of go rescue them and stuff. So I really try to focus on the planning side at defining conservatively what those levels of difficulty are. So I use slope angle shading again. How long is the hike in? If the helicopter doesn't show up, can these guys hike 15 miles out at the end of the day, or they're not going to be able to do that? The other thing I think about is what's their skill, medical skill. If I'm putting them in a really tough, dangerous environment and they're far away from help, I want to make sure I've got a high level of medical skill on that team, preferably someone who does it as a day job. And so those kinds of things are really important to think about as you craft these and as you design your deployment plan. Excuse me. Air, some water. Area search teams are typically 2 to 6. I go four most of the time. One of the things that's changed for us though is with Caltopo and the Caltopo mobile app. I've started to shrink my search segments down somewhat, and I've started to shrink my teams down a little bit, and it gives me like more chess pieces to move around. It makes it a little more difficult operationally, but I have a lot more granularity, and I don't end up with search segments that are only a third searched at the end of the day or half searched. I have a lot better chance of finishing up a whole segment and that sort of thing. So that's something you can kind of adjust. Drainage teams, I usually use odd numbers, one at the bottom and one or two on each side. Neighborhood search teams are a little different for dimensional searches. I usually like to have a spotter near the curb if it's a situation or an area where someone might get in trouble with the local citizens. So someone can make a radio call if they need to. And then obviously K9 teams, one handler, one flanker. So I think about my assignment sizes based on that. And sadly, we don't have enough time today, but we have a lot of material on how to, rate resources and how to scale them for a search and how to get them in and out of the field. Bulk operations are a great tool in here. I just briefly mentioned it, but bulk operations, after you write 10 or 20 or 50 assignments, you can populate all sorts of things like radio channels and assignment labels and things like that all at once. And what I'm going to do now is kind of flip over to an example. I'm going to talk about how we use it in the real world here. One second. Okay, there we go. That should be good, right? Okay, so this is a real search we had here several years ago, and I keep this old example because it was before we had the Snap to functionality. So one of the things you can see if I zoom way in is Rich didn't do a very good job of drawing borders between segments. I actually drew this whole planet, and I'm like, today it's a great example of how not to do things because like who's searching the trail here? There's no assignment on the trail, but there's assignment here and assignment there. So Snap to just alleviates all those kind of things. And oftentimes you see poorly drawn segments like these with overlap and things, and it just gets really confusing. And then if I'm kind of someone who's experienced and I show up at a search and all the segments look like that, I'm going to go like, wow, I wonder how much thought went into this plan, or this is pretty sloppy. So I kind of like I really respect it when people can do a good, clean job putting a search plan together. It's not always possible, but it's a good start. And this is how I don't like to do it anymore. But here's an example though of where I've gone in and I've written a search plan. This is for a despondent actually, and a few things that we don't do anymore, like range rings. I almost never use them. And you can see how I kind of picked a range here and I kind of made my segments fit. That kind of makes me cringe today. I view search areas as open-ended and my strategies vary with distance, but I would never like put an artificial constraint like that on my search area. Another thing I like to point out here. But now that we have this ready to go, what you'll see is I've written descriptions for each one of these assignments. I did something a little bit unusual here. First thing, I'm going to turn off my range rings just to make things more clear. And you can see I used operational periods a little bit differently. I don't do this very often, but in this particular case, we had a huge cadaver dog component. So I actually kind of drew separate assignments and I just called it a separate operational period. So, I could see at a glance the ones I intend to be canine primary. And then by clicking this one off, I can see the ones I intended to be ground searcher priority. So I can get that view a couple different ways in here by keeping them all in the same operational period. But I thought this was kind of handy and it's also a great tool to use for error assignments because you don't want error assignments clogging up your view. Sometimes I'll put them in a separate folder or I'll make a operational period 2 dash air or UAV or whatever. And then those assignments can be turned off by default and so forth, and I don't see them. All right, so here we go. We've got a couple of, a bunch of assignments written. I've got my descriptions in here. Those look good. But if I go in and edit any one of those assignments, like this one, um, you'll see that I've got an assignment view here. And the show additional fields button is new and it's important because as I expand this out, this is all the information that's on the 104 form, every bit of it. So this has kind of taken the place of the 104 form because everyone has the phone now with the app. And this is only maybe 3 months old, 4 months old, something like that. So, I've got my operational period. I haven't populated all the details here yet, but I'm going to do that in a second. Previous efforts, how long, what are the comms channels, all that stuff is here invisible. Description of the assignment. If it's longer, I can drag it down and see the rest of it. And all that shows up nicely in the app. So we're actually changing our best practice. We don't print all the 104 summary forms out anymore because it's already in the electronic side of things. And if you lose your phone, you've lost your search segments anyway. So it's all in the same place, basically. So right now I have a nice plan written here. Not the best segments, but now I need some labeling. So bear with me on how we label things because I'm going to talk about that after this. But I'm going to go in here and click on bulk operations at the bottom. And you can see I have a bunch of things here. Basically, this is like a spreadsheet if you haven't seen it before. And I can click on the header up here and I can sort by whatever is in that column. I can sort by size or team size or priority, which is a good way to do it. So in this case, let's say I'm going to put my high priority assignments at the top by clicking on priority a couple times. I want summer dog and summer ground. And now I want to label my assignment. So I'm going to click on the top line. I'm going to scroll to the bottom. I'm going to shift click on the bottom, just like you would in Excel or something like that. And down below here, you can see this thing called title sequentially. So if I click on that, I can say start with AA. So we're going to start labeling our segments with AA. And I hit OK. And you can see instantly every single assignment has been labeled starting with AA. And I know those are high priority because they were at the top of that list. And they work all the way down to, in this case, AT. So, and then when it gets to the end of the alphabet, it'll go BA, BB, BC, and so forth. So that's why I don't like to label anything ahead of time. And another thing that's a best practice, which I think I touch on later at large, is when we run a campaign search for multiple days, we never reuse a segment label because that can be, if someone has an old map, it can be a mess. And there's a lot of letters in the alphabet that you can cycle through. So we never reuse them. We might retire some segments, but we never reuse their names again. So those are permanent for the search. So here we go. That's all cool. And I'm good to go. And then I could say like, all right, I'm going to send my first 5 teams out as team 101 Actually, I'll do that later. Let me go that later. So the next thing I want to do is put in our comms channels. Well, I'm going to do our canines first, and I know canine teams like to use special comms channels. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to select the thing called where is it? Change attributes. See that? So I'm going to click on change attributes, and anything I change on this form now is going to be propagated to the assignments I had just selected. So I go in here and I go like, all right, it's still in a draft status. We'll say it's prepared. And I wrote the assignment, and my primary is going to be SAR1, let's say, channel SAR1. And because they're dog handlers, they use the California Rescue Dog Association channel 4, let's say. And I'm not going to change, and this is going to be, everything else is the same. And I hit update. So now if I go back and find one of those Carta Canine assignments, which I can't remember the letters on, um, let me find it 1 second. It's going to be one of these top ones that's a dog. Let's see. Is that one? There we go. So there's one I should have just changed. Yeah, you can see down here, it's got the comms channels in there now. It's got my name and its prepared status. So that's all great. The next thing I can do is, okay, so if we're in the mobile app using this, it's kind of clunky because operational period 2 is blue and purple, let's say for because I split it into two, and it's hard to see the borders still sometimes when you're out there, especially when you're using a little screen on a phone. So one of the new functionalities, again, only in the last few months, is if I go to the bottom, click bulk operations, I'm going to select every single assignment. And all assignments used to be one color per operational period by default, but you could view other things. But what I can do now is I can hit this randomize colors button, which is new. And now it's permanently changed the colors of these. If I reload this map right now, I'm going to have all of these randomized colors. So if I'm using the mobile app, this looks way better, right? Because I'm out in the field, I'm trying to figure out where I am and where the border is of my assignment. I can see, oh, there's the red one next to me, and I'm in the blue one. So that's way better, and it was not accessible on the mobile app before today. But I still have this other cool functionality at the bottom called display settings. So even though I permanently color them random, I can go in here, and I don't know if you can see this pop up or not because it goes off the screen, but I can say show colors by operational period, or I can say show colors by resource type. So the canines are one color and the ground people are another color. And then I can say by status, and I use status a lot. So status comes on each assignment at the bottom. If I say show additional fields, you'll see status here, and the status choices are draft, prepared, in progress, and completed. So if you have like a crack overhead team, when you send the teams out, you'll change them to in progress, right? So once I get a team number and I've deployed them, they're in progress now, and see they're red. So I know that that one's being searched. Segment AR, and then segment AR finishes their segment. I go down here and I change segment AR to completed. And now they're going to have yet another color, which is purple in this case. So if I'm doing a big search and I have like government officials or police or fire coming over saying, hey, how's it going? Where are we? I can just simply go down to the bottom, turn on the status view, and I can see by instantaneously, which assignments haven't been started, which ones are underway, which ones are completed. That's a really powerful tool, and it's all just, displaying the data that's already in the system. But someone has to be on top of things to keep that all up, and that's something we always emphasize on our team. Someone's in charge, whoever's tracking teams in the field, and I'm going to talk about that soon. Those guys need to stay on top of this and update those fields. And then you have like an incredibly great display of what's going on in your search, and you don't lose control of things. So that's really good. So a couple other things you can do here. You can actually print the old 104 forms, which we don't really use anymore. I'm going to talk about that. And then you can also do the 104 summary for deployment. And this one is actually still used. And if I click on that, and assuming I put in head counts in all my segments, what I'm going to get out is a little hard to see here. Let me put it in a different format. Actually, that's harder to see. But what this does is it basically adds up your head counts by priority and by types. So I have canines, I have ground teams, and ground type 2 and ground type 3. And so if each team only did one assignment per day, I would need that many people. I can see 36 type, 2, whatever over here, 24 of these, 12 of these, and so forth. So if I'm ordering resources, I can kind of get a handle on that. I'll usually divide these numbers by two or more because most teams can do at least a couple assignments if they're correctly sized for the day. Or maybe if they're big alpine assignments, I'll keep it at that and be a little conservative. But it's a way to get a good handle quickly on your resource needs. But it requires that you go in and actually put down, four ground searchers or six ground searchers or whatever into the actual assignment label, like I've done right here. Let's just show you where that is. Team size is two because it's a K9 team, right? So if you do that all, then you have all those little handy references. And then I'm going to show you another thing that I find really useful. Oops, I'm kind of stuck in an edit loop here. Cancel. There we go. Back down to bulk operations. And I'm going to sort by size here because one of my big pet peeves is that I want to make sure I get all my segment sizes reasonable. And if you look at the search, these are okay. Even though it's a human, a despondent search, um, the ones that are large, like 60 acres, 40 to 60 acres, those are the low probability, much further out area segments. But as I get into the high probability area of the missing person, I'm as little as 7 acres and up to maybe 20 acres. And I have all days. So, and I want people, looking for a non-responsive subject. So I feel pretty good about my sizes. So if I just drew, like on a remote planning call, if we just drew like 75 or 100 segments for a search, which is not uncommon, the first thing I'm going to do is say like, whoa, 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 we have what's this 250 acres? What is this? What's that? And it's a lot easier to see it in a table like this than just visually inspecting the map because you're constantly zooming in and out and you kind of lose a feel for how big segments are. So this is a great little tool for checking things like that. Bulk operations is quite excellent. Any questions on how that works pretty much? There's a lot to it. Okey-doke. Easy crowd to please there. All right, let me hop back to my other thing. Uh, Here we go. 1 second. Okay. Wish it was a little easier to click back and forth here. There we go. All right, so as I just mentioned, set the detailed typing of 1, 2, and 3. And the only thing I'm super careful about is type. I'm really careful about type 1 just because I've had bad situations that kind of blew up searches for a period of time more than once. So team sizes, priorities are important as well. And another thing I should mention on priorities, since I'm sitting at home writing this plan this afternoon and you're briefing people tomorrow morning, it's really important for me to set those priorities thoughtfully, the highs, the mediums, the lows. I'll often do that visually. I'll put the map into priority mode and then, under display settings. And then I will start say, well, let me go back. I'm going to go back and show you. It's a better way to do it. Sorry. Okay, so here's my plan that I just did. I'm going to come down to the bottom and I'm going to hit display settings by priority, which you may not be able to see the choice, but it's there. All right, so here's my priority and the red ones are high or the in here. And then actually, let me see what the priority colors are. Yeah, the blue ones are the highest priorities, the red ones are less, and so forth. It's not a super great example, but what I do is if I'm with the planning team and we just wrote a gigantic search plan, and we kind of know our peak areas of interest, I'm going to go in and say, AP should be a high priority, AO should be. And we can just sit there and toggle them into high. And then when I'm looking at the map in priority view, then I'll start to see, all the red areas near the center light up. And then as I go out a little further, I've got medium priorities. And then I have these drainages that go out 5 miles, and those are still high priorities because a guy could have gone down the drainage. And so you can kind of visualize all that, and we'll negotiate and we'll iterate on that, and then we'll say like, okay, that's our plan. We have 15 high priorities, we have 15 medium, and we have 25 low priority assignments. And then when I hand that off to the management team for the next day, they've got a good idea of at least what we thought. They may have their own ideas and say, I think you guys are overemphasizing this area versus that, and they might change it a little. But the idea is that you've given them your best thought after working on this for a couple of hours or more as to what they should be doing first. So I think that's a really important thing. Okay. So then we already did headcount and stuff. Um, and then when the plan is complete, one of the things I do throughout the process is exporting, which I didn't actually show you, but there's an export button on the map. I won't go back to it right now, but there's an export button where you can just archive a backup constantly with all the data on your map. And during a live search, I'll pretty much do that all day long, like every half an hour or whatever. It's just like downloading something in your browser, and I just leave it in my temporary folder. And that way, if I screw something up, like delete someone's track or whatever, I can recover it pretty easily. All right, we'll complete our incident action plan packaging. As I mentioned, we don't put our assignments in there anymore because they're all in the app. Oops, they're all in the app pretty much. But I'll go through, my objectives, the organization. We actually spend a whole day on the planning P and how you get all this stuff right. But the comms plan, the medical plan, safety plan, we usually maybe put one or two maps in, but now the maps are all on the phone. I do want a missing person flyer in my IAP for sure. And then once again, make sure those assignment priorities are tagged in Caltopo. And then I'm pretty much good to go. So here's the thing I've already spoken about once, which is the new randomized color. This image on the left is how the mobile app has looked up until today, or up until 6 months ago. And it was just sort of a flaw with the system because when you view it, you had to view it by operational period, and all operational periods are one color. So that's kind of hard to see, like, oh, where is my assignment exactly? So if you hit that randomize color permanently button, and you end up with something like this on the right, which looks way better, right? So if I'm sending a team out there, and there may be a little overlap here because there's a buffer trail with an area assignment next to it. But the point is, I'm going to have a lot better chance of following the map on the right than I am following the map on the left. It's good stuff. All right, let's talk about packaging and stuff. All right, here it gets a little messy. So back in starting 1980, the 104 form, back when we had plastic sheets that we put over the maps, and then you colored in the assignments and things, and then you Xeroxed the map and handed it to them with a highlighter. The map that, the 4-part NCR form that went with that was really important because it would have the name of the people on the team. One copy goes to the team leader, one to ops, one's to plans, one to comms, and everybody's on the same page. They know who's out there. In this case, it's called Team 202, and we've got their names. That's all good. And Caltopo in its early iterations, and still to this day, can print that long form out. Um, Around 2016, Matt and I worked a lot on saying, that's a lot of extra paperwork, and it really complicates putting together an IAP or a package of assignments. So we went to what's called the 104 summary, which is in bulk operations, which has all of that same information, but it has it in a condensed form. And what it doesn't have is the name of all your team members. So I put together this other form called the 104 summary, and I got it made at some outside printing places. And since we already had the assignment information in the IAP, all we had to do was have something with multiple copies so we knew where all the teams were out there. So we did essentially the same thing. It was just a different workflow. And now we've kind of canned that as well because this is how it looks now. And this is kind of our new best practice down here in California. So we have an IAP package, which we're very religious about, and that's another multi-hour discussion. But it historically, for the last 10 years anyway, has included all the basic 104s forms. It still does include 204. Someone mentioned divisions. If we're running divisions or groups, like we have a water group operating out there or whatever, we'll still include that in the IAP. But all the individual level assignments are in the Caltopo app and Caltopo map. So traditionally, last 10 years, over on the left, here's an assignment JA, thick vegetation, steep, search along roads and trails, check all social trails, probe accessible areas. Previous efforts limited along some periphery, not searched in OP11. So there you go. The right hand side shows what the app looks like now after its upgrades. And guess what? It has exactly the same information. I don't have it fully expanded, but it shows the operational period, resource type, team size, you know, priority. Actually, priority is in there now. All those things are directly available inside the map now, or inside the device now. So we're like, why are we printing all this extra paper when it's redundant at this point? And then someone will say, well, what if your phone crashes? You don't have the assignment anymore. Well, if your phone crashes, you don't have the map anymore and you can't record tracks. So, you either have it or you don't. So for us, we just kind of came to this realization that we were just doing it for no good reason anymore. So we're basically recommending that you drop the printing of the 104 summaries or whatever, but you still have some tracking to do and stuff. And I want to talk about that next. So what does our typical package look like down here now? We'll have our IAP, a cover doc, objectives, comms plan, all that kind of stuff, your management structure. We'll have an overview map typically. We'll leave out, now optional, we'll leave out the 104 summary, and I still use my little four-part form here to track the actual team members that go in the field. Some teams down here are writing software. We actually have some guys working on it to kind of automate this and tie it into Caltopo. I think that'll probably evolve soon into something that's more common as a workflow. But that's pretty much the package. Each team leader gets an IAP with all of the comms plans, the medical plan. That pink section you can barely see here in the middle, that's something we really emphasize, and it's essentially the incident within the incident workflow. If someone on your team gets hurt, what do you do? Just remember that because it's going to get, when you're panicking, it's going to give you all the information you need to collect and get back to the command post. So that's kind of our package now that we send teams in the field with. So finally, our search is beginning here. How do we label and track our assignments? You already saw me label things AA and so forth. Well, there used to be two fields. There was a alpha lab field and a numerical field in Caltopo. Now it's one field, but it still hosts both types of things. It'll host letters and numbers. So, do you send team AA into search segment AA? Kind of makes sense in some places. Do you send team 101 to search segment 101? That kind of makes sense too. Or do you send team 101 to search segment AA? At first, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I argued against it for quite a while with Matt in particular, because we would go to mutual aid searches and I'd want to do it the way our team does it, and he'd want to do it the way his team does it, which is exactly why we try to standardize things and come up with an approach, kind of statewide where we have a little bit of standardization. And so let me talk about why it turns out Matt was right on this. And here's my take. Rich likes assignment numbers, and it's easy in Marin County. They're easy to match to a team number. I write a plan with a search segment 101, and I send team 101 into that search segment, and I've written down all their information. I know who's on that team. There's no confusion. And then I'm like, when you're done with that assignment at 11:30, come on back to the CP, get a smoked salmon sandwich or whatever we do here, and then, rest up, have some natural water and stuff, and then we'll send you out on a new assignment with a new team number. And that worked, right? Because everyone came back and they got new paperwork and they went out again. So there was no confusion. So Matt's up there, in Truckee in the Alpine environment, and he's like, nobody comes back to command, but we can't do any of that stuff. And he goes, that doesn't make any sense. It's way too complicated. I got a team that's 10 miles out in the backcountry, and I tell them, oh, you're not team 101 anymore. You're team 105 now. And they're like, what? I can't hear you. So it gets very confusing if you're trying to change paperwork and team numbers way out in the backcountry. So his argument was that you should write a map that has segments on it, and those segments have descriptions of what searching should be done inside those segments. And then the team that searches those is independent of the segment. So team 101 can search segment AA in this case. And when they complete it, I get on the radio and say, hey, 101, can you go search Alpha Charlie when you're done with Alpha Alpha? And they say, sure, no problem. We'll take care of that. And then I have to update that information. So it's a little bit trickier for tracking teams in the field. Where is 101 now? Did they finish AA? Are they in AC? So operations has to stay on top of that because it's not it's not as simple as the 101 searching 101 type approach, but it has worked great. And we've switched to this about 10 years ago, um, and I hate to admit it, but Matt was exactly right. It is a better way to do it. So our best practice looks like this now. Each assignment should be written with an alpha designator, and you can use that bulk operations command. And if I wrote 52 assignments, I would have Alpha Alpha through Bravo Zulu, all labeled automatically. And as I mentioned a little while ago, I retain those alpha designators for the duration of the search. We never reuse them. And some giant searches, we might get, two-thirds of the way through the double letter alphabet by the time we're done, you know. And then we update Caltopo segments with team numbers as needed as we move the teams around. So how does that look? Here's the example I just gave you where I went through and had a despondent search that, I labeled my segments on. So we're all good. And this goes in my IAP as is, let's say. And then I'm ops chief. I've got my little sheet on my aluminum clipboard and I'm putting my team out. Our standard is that the first digit of, or the first digit or two digits, depending on how many OPs you've gone through, is the operational period. And then the last two digits are the team numbers for that day. So here I am. I'm like, okay, Alpha Alpha through Alpha Delta are my four highest priority assignments. I'm going to give them to team 101, 102, 103, and 104. And I brief those teams and I send them out in the field. And then one of the clever ops, or we call them plops sometimes, they're really planning people. They're like, okay, let me copy your sheet. I'm going to update Caltopo with all the assignments underway. So now Caltopo in the upper left corner says Alpha Alpha 101, Alpha Beta 102, Alpha Bravo 102, so forth and so on. And then, I finished the first assignment and Alpha Alpha finishes and I'm reassigning them to Alpha Kilo. So over on the right now, I go to Alpha Kilo and type in 101 and edit it and say it's underway now. And then later on, they finish that and I put him into Alpha Lima and then I say it's underway. And then I say Alpha Kilo is complete. So, based on that comms traffic and all, someone gets in the flow of it and they keep it all updated and it stays really tight. And I have a great record of what's gone on and everything that's happening in the search is in Caltopo and all the teams in the field, assuming they have cell coverage or satellite coverage, can see exactly, what's going on around them, what teams are nearby, all that kind of stuff in real time. So that works super well. And then once again, the visualization, which I kind of described, I've got a bunch of completed assignments, which are purple here. I have prepared assignments, which not have gone out yet, which are in this amber color. And then in red, I have assignments that are still in progress. So, right there, I have my snapshot. And if something looks funny on there, I can kind of figure out quickly at a glance that, wait a minute, that it says it's not started yet, but I know I've sent that whole block of assignments out and I can correct my mistake if I have it. So that visualization thing is super handy. Hang on one second. As I mentioned, we have a search going on and I'm getting pinged constantly. So, okay. So there we are. And now we've got this whole kind of clear tracking system set up. So what does the material look like? Here's a search from 2015, massive amounts of paper, gigantic printed, rolls of plotter maps and things. And like most of the stuff's gone. And the other aspect of this is we'd be printing the stuff at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and then we'd be getting up at 6 to brief everybody, which was always problematic. Now we have preferably all the planning and printing done by 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So it's a whole different world. This is what our new system looks like. We have a big monitor that we set up for briefing. We have a nice, clean, small, compact IAP, and all the plan information's inside the mobile app for people going out in the field. So it just looks a lot better and it's higher situational awareness, and it's great. It's just a much better system. So that is that on part two, like the workflow. I know it's a lot of stuff, but I wanted to kind of portray, what that workflow is and how it really looks for us on a day-to-day basis. Any questions, comments on that? I think so.
On all the colorations, are there legends to that change depending?
Yes, so a little bit. So like if you look in bulk ops, see the status column here, that shows you like purple is completed. So you have to kind of cross-reference it there, but it does appear in there. So should we take a 5-minute break then and then do the last Caltopo segment?
If you can hear
Yeah. What?
me. We have a lot of road searches where we're searching roads, either hiking or with OHV. When you're doing that type of search, do you do that as a segment or a buffer? What are your thoughts on?
So yeah, so it very to me it's whatever's cleaner. If it's a really remote area where there's not many roads, I'll draw a buffer along each road basically is what I'll typically do. If it's an area that's got a massive spaghetti web of trails, then I'll definitely draw it into an area segment and say, okay, you guys enter from the south and try to hit all these trails within this area. And then at the end of the day, you know, all we really care about are tracks and what got traversed and what didn't. So then I'm still going to have a great idea of what they covered at the end of the day. I just want to keep that map as clean as possible. And if I try to draw each one of those little ones, it gets really messy, right? So I think it's whatever's cleaner for the situation.